Hello and welcome to my video game sound design tutorial on Massive. In today's video, we're going to be covering the Modulation Oscillator down here. Now we've already covered the Oscillator 1, 2, and 3, a little bit basics of the filters, and we're also going to be covering the noise section as well today. And as these videos go on, by the end of the series, we'll know how to use Massive inside and out, and it'll be no problem to make anything we can think of, so long as we know the principles. That's the most important part. So let's talk about this modulation oscillator section. So what this section does is that it generates sine waves in the audible range. So for those of you who have used synthesizers before, you know that a low frequency oscillator generates signals in the inaudible range, so below 20 hertz. And what a modulation oscillator does is that it generates signals in the audible range and then combines its frequencies, its sound, with one of these three oscillators. So that might sound complicated, and it kind of is, but I'm going to show you what each of these mean. So down here you can see that after I turn this on, we have a whole bunch of different options. We have a ring modulator, phase, position modulation, and filter FM. And I'm going to explain what each of these are and show you how to use this. But generally, when it comes to just pure practicality, this modulation oscillator section is very useful for creating aggressive, cutting sound. So if you need something that cuts through or is really aggressive, this is a great place to look in general. So let's start with this ring modulator. So basically, a ring modulator combines two audio signals, so its own and an oscillator that you pick, in such a way that the frequencies are combined and it creates a new signal. And that kind of combined element is called a sideband, just so you know the technical kind of ins and outs. But I'm going to play around with this and you're going to hear what this does. But to assign it to an oscillator, first I have to click it. So I click ring modulator over here. And then I click which oscillator I want to assign it to. And I can only do one at a time. So I can only choose off, oscillator 1, oscillator 2, or oscillator 3. Not all three at once, just one at a time. So if I just change this to, let's say, iron, so this is the table I'm choosing. I'm a big fan of that one. And I'll turn this modulation oscillator off so you can hear what this raw sound sounds like just with this one oscillator. I just think that sounds really neat. So I'm going to take this modulation oscillator, turn it on, and I'm going to assign the ring modulator to 1. So I would click here on the name and then click 1. Then I can use this knob to assign how much ring modulation I want. So I'll turn this all the way down to 0 and turn it up gradually so you can hear the difference. And I can pitch this modulation oscillator individually as well. So if I pitch this up, so you can probably already hear the sci-fi sound design potential, which is great. And I just double clicked there to turn that back to 0 quickly. So let's do the phase modulation next. So phase modulation is similar to FM synthesis or frequency modulation synthesis. And we're going to cover that when we eventually cover FM8, which is another Native Instruments synthesizer, very, very popular. So if you want, though, I do have a video on the basics of FM synthesis on my channel, and I'll link it in the description below and put up an annotation so you can know how that works. So how this works is that the modulation oscillator acts as the modulator while the main oscillator becomes the carrier. And if you have no idea what that means, that's okay. Just watch that video that I put up on the basics of FM synthesis. And again, annotation card, and I'll put in the description as well, and then you'll understand what that means. I want to keep these videos relatively short, so I don't want to get into the explanations that are already covered elsewhere. So just so you can hear what this sounds like, I will turn this all the way down, assign it to oscillator 1, and gradually turn it up. So pretty crazy. It can really make some pretty insane sounds. It can create some very high modulation amounts and then sound very, very intense very, very quickly. And what this can do is, if I just turn it up just a hair, I can kind of generate a quick little click at the beginning of these sounds. Let's turn it up ever so slightly. So you can get a little bit of bite, or actually quite a lot of bite, depending on the sound that you pick. So if I go back to a basic square saw, again, something like that, let's make it sound really kind of sine wave-ish almost, just a little bit, and turn up this phase modulation. Right around there, we can hear that it generates a bit of a click, a little bit of a tap at the start of the sound. We get a bit of a sharper attack. And of course, it morphs the hell out of the signal so that, you know, you can use this if you want an FM-esque sound. And again, we'll get into that. But also so that if you want something that has a quick little click at the very beginning and creates kind of a classic, almost SNES, Sega Genesis-esque sound, which is what they use. They used FM synthesis quite a bit for their sound chips. So next up, let's do position modulation. And I'll turn that on by clicking position modulation. You can click the 1, 2, or 3, again, depending on which oscillator you want to assign it to. And this is basically, I think, massive only. I believe this is kind of pretty exclusive to massive, but what it does is that it makes the modulation really, really accentuated. It accentuates different parts of the wavetable that you select. And what this generally does in terms of practicality is that it generates kind of a bowed or blown instrument sound. So like a violin or a flute, it generates kind of a surface noise as if it's a bow being dragged across a string or air going across a flute is kind of the practical way of thinking about this. So if I turn this all the way down and I'll play, let's switch waveforms because why not? Let's do rough math. I'll turn this all the way down so you can't hear any, just hear the raw form, waveform. Now I'll turn this on and we'll turn it up gradually. Go a little bit higher so you can hear the difference there. So completely pure. Then a little bit of position modulation. So it adds just a little bit of extra, like I said, surface noise to the effect. And that's kind of the practical way of thinking about this. And last up, let's cover this filter frequency modulation. So this allows us to modulate the frequency of one of the filters with the modulation oscillator. So we're not controlling the oscillators anymore. Here, we are actually controlling the filters. So if I, again, turn this all the way down, have this basic sound, I'm going to send this to filter 1. I'm going to put this on, let's say, a low-pass filter, pretty standard sound. Let's actually turn this off completely just to make sure. So what I did was turn this filter 1 on. I have a low-pass filter here. Turn the cutoff up just a bit. Filter 2 isn't doing anything right now because there's no filter assigned to it. And with these faders, like I explained in a previous video, I can just make sure that this is sending all to filter 1. So that's our sound right now. I'll turn on this modulation oscillator, and now I'm affecting the frequency of the filter. So you know what that sounds like. Let's take a listen. So this is with it all the way down, and I'll turn it up gradually. And now I can affect the pitch over here. Let's pitch this down. So really cool for creating that kind of granulated, separated, poppy, bubbly sort of effect. And if I can keep going with this, I can keep pitching it down. And you hear that it starts to separate the sound more and more. So if you want to make a cell phone sort of ring or the codec ring from Metal Gear, this is a great place to start, to have a whole bunch of separated elements within the same general patch. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off for now, and we'll go to the noise section for the last part of our video. And noise is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. So the noise section is usually on by default, but it isn't acting at all because we've turned this amp knob all the way down. And by default, it's turned all the way to 0. And you can play with these amp knobs, by the way, in any of these sections to change the volume of each of your oscillators, or your noise channel, or this feedback, which we'll get into later, and on and on. So in this noise section, what this does is basically add some nice unpitched material to our sound. And all of you have heard noise in some way, shape, or form as far as synthesizers go before, especially if you've played old NES games. All the drums were done with noise channels. So I'm going to actually turn this oscillator off, and I'm going to turn this noise channel up so you can hear just the noise on its own. Pitch changes depending on which key I'm pressing. Turn this filter off just to make sure. There we go. So that's it without the filter. I had the filter on. So kind of sounds like the old NES hi-hat sort of sound. But we can actually change what's known as the wavetable of the noise. So we can have different types of noise. We have different wavetables associated with this noise as well. So let's try Tapis just to see what that sounds like. We can try one more. Let's go to Murmur. So as you can hear, there's a whole bunch of variety here. And again, it's unpitched material that you'd like to add to your sound. And there's a color knob that kind of acts as a wavetable position knob for these noise wavetables. So I'll switch back to just old white noise, and I'll play with this color knob. Sounds like an explosion on an old NES game. So you can play with that for any one of these noise types. So you can play around with this, add it to different oscillators. So if I turn this oscillator on, and add just a little bit of noise in if I turn this amp down. So you hear just a tiny bit underneath. And we'll get into making sounds with this noise channel later on when we get into the actual sound creation. But this stuff can be really fun and add a nice character or a little bit of bite, a little bit of subtle bite to the sound that you're creating. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. And in the next video, we'll dive more into this feedback section, filters, and maybe we'll start to dive into this crazy center console as well. This is when this stuff gets really, really crazy and really fun. And as this series goes on, after you start to master Massive, you will start to get tutorials on how to actually just make sounds in it, how to make sci-fi stuff, how to make UI sounds, all that sort of good stuff, lasers, anything synthy that you can think of, we'll start to play around with in here. So if you like this video, please subscribe for my newsletter. That's where all my best stuff is sent to. I send all my best career advice on how to get a great job in the game industry, especially if you want to freelance or do music and sound. That's what I focus on. If you want to start working for better clients, get paid for what you do, which is pretty awesome, all that good stuff. I give tons of advice through my newsletter. So sign up there to get an ebook as well that will help you charge clients. So for those of you who are starting to maybe work for free a little bit and you want to work with clients and they ask, how much do you charge? You can actually know exactly how to respond without worrying about freaking out. So that's what that ebook will help you with. It has word for word scripts, all sorts of good stuff in there. So sign up. And also, of course, I have to rep this. Watch my TED Talk on the power of video game music. Gave a TED Talk a little while ago, almost a year ago now, on the power of video game music. So check that out. Annotation, card, description below, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.